It is one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world. No freedom of the press, brutal lifelong military service, an economy that is in ruins and a complete lack of prospects. Today we are dealing with one of the most extraordinary countries in the world, which is not called the North Korea of Africa for nothing. In many areas, such as the Democracy Index and freedom of the press, the country regularly ranks behind North Korea. Numerous people fleeing the repressive regime report catastrophic and traumatic conditions in the country. But why has Eritrea, which was once a glimmer of hope in East Africa, developed so negatively? How does the brutal dictatorship work and why do we hardly hear anything about the country? We take a look at all these questions in today's video. Unlike most other regions in East Africa, Eritrea did not fall into the hands of the British or French at the beginning of the 1980s, but the Italians spread out there. They conquered what is now Eritrea bit by bit from the coast and officially founded the Colonia Eritrea. Shortly before the Second World War, the Italians also invaded the much larger Ethiopia from their colony, which until then had been one of the few states in Africa to defend its independence. Italy was also able to occupy Ethiopia for a short time, and by merging all the colonies in the region, Italian East Africa was created. However, this rule only lasted until the year 1941, when the Italian troops there were defeated by the Allies. From then on, the territory was under British military administration until a permanent international solution could be found for the region. And this solution ultimately consisted of Eritrea and Ethiopia, which was still called Abyssinia at the time, existing as a joint independent federal state from then on. However, what formerly sounded like a good solution was to end in disaster. The Ethiopian emperor gradually took away all political rights from the Eritrean population and gradually abolished Eritrea's independence. Eventually, the Eritrean regional parliament was also dissolved, causing the population's discontent to escalate into violence. From the year 1961, the Eritrean War of Independence began, which lasted a total of 30 years. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians lost their lives in this war, but it ended with a victory for the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. They called for an independence referendum, which was eventually held under UN supervision and in which over 99% of those who voted were in favor of independence. As a result, the country became fully independent in the year 1993, and many hoped that everything would now be better. The country adopted a democratic constitution, numerous parties were founded, and the hope was that the future would be golden. But everything turned out differently. Tensions with neighboring Ethiopia continued and border conflicts arose time and again. Domestically, too, everything went differently than planned, and that had a lot to do with this man. Isaias Afewerki, the party leader of the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, which emerged from the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. He was initially appointed interim president until the first elections. But in fact he did not believe in elections or any other democratic elements at all. He immediately abolished all other parties, and to this day, 30 years after independence, there has not been a single election in Eritrea. He is still president, and he openly admitted that he had no intention of holding elections for the next few decades. And in all other areas, too, he destroyed the Eritreans' dreams of pluralism and freedom. And he did so at a speed and on a scale that almost no other country in the world can match. Moreover, the country was of too little importance for international forces to intervene. But let's take a look at today's figures for the country, because they are frightening. The country consistently ranks at the bottom of the Democracy Index, and in some statistics the country is even in last place behind North Korea. The situation is similar when it comes to freedom of the press. Here too, in the year 2021, it was once again voted into last place, also behind North Korea. The president has managed to completely isolate the country in a very short space of time, suppressing any opposition or help from abroad. He holds onto power primarily through the military. Military service was increased from the original 6 months to life. Conversely, this means forced labor for an indefinite period of time. Incidentally, this also applies to women. It is not possible to refuse. In some cases, even schoolchildren are conscripted, and military service is described by refugees as dreary and traumatic. And this is also the reason why more and more people are fleeing the country. All people, whether men or women, are virtually condemned for life to do forced labor for the ruler. A United Nations special rapporteur has also identified serious human rights violations such as arbitrary killings and arrests, enforced disappearances, torture, and a lack of freedom of expression, religion, and assembly. It is therefore not surprising that Eritrea is one of the countries with the highest proportion of citizens living outside the country. It is estimated that around a fifth of the population now lives abroad. And it is only through them that anything gets out at all, as the ruler otherwise completely isolates the flow of information to the outside world. And that is also the reason why so little is reported about the country. Nevertheless, it is incredibly important not to lose sight of this country and to openly name the dark machinations of the dictator. At the moment, it doesn't look like anything will change in the near future.